thy faithfulness. Great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness. Great is thy faithfulness. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. Wow, that was about the most beautiful thing I've ever heard in my life. It was incredible. My name is Maureen Hagan Callahan. Can you hear me okay? You all right? Okay. And you shall hear me. Amen. Thank you. My name is Maureen Hagan Callahan, and Joe Clarke was my godfather, and I adored that man. Joe had a beautiful smile and a remarkably calm manner that I believe set the stage for him wherever he went throughout his life. As a side, my brothers and I saw him as a very thoughtful guy, devoted to his kids, but really the coolest guy ever, which could have something to do with the 33.5 speed Batman record he delivered to our home in the 1960s. This was back when he worked for, I believe, WMAL in DC. Joe Clarke loved Mary Pat. He loved his family, and he loved God. It is no wonder to us that he has been one of the most admired men in Baltimore. Joe was a true son of this city, and he loved it so dearly. He and Mary Pat were a great team from the very beginning when they met at an 8th grade dance. They went on 9th. I'm sorry. Even better. They went on to raising their 4 wonderful, wonderful children, John and Susan, Aaron, and Jenny, who is my goddaughter. Joe raised his children with such thoughtful purpose, with his wit, his sense of wonder, and great care. For example, I know that a Saturday trip to the art museum started backwards by visiting the museum gift shop first. There, he bought each child a postcard of a painting of their choice, and only then he took them into the gallery with a mission to find those paintings. Joe ensured his children with great educations. He taught them to be a socially conscious, loving, and faithful family. Imagine growing up with such incredible parents who worked tirelessly and in tandem to make the city of Baltimore the wonderful place that it is, not just politically, but with respect for everyone in it. But to see his face as the grandchildren were born and came along, it was a sight to behold. Your grandfather cherished you, each and every one of you, with his whole heart and soul. Paul, I hear that Joe embraced and learned the name of every character in Thomas the Tank Engine, and then everything that ever mattered to you from then on. Lucy, I believe your keen interest in reading news and literature was inspired by your grandfather. And did he ever love sharing them with you? Amy, your wonderful sense of humor led to endless happy hours and mutual giggles over silly jokes and stories. Will, Joe was amazed by your running speed, quite the lacrosse player. And may I say, he loved your magnificent hair that flowed in the breeze, flying behind you. Please know, Will, that your bravery inspired him when he needed it the most. Jamie, imagine his joy watching you dance with your twin sister, and he was so proud of your tennis finesse. Well done. Ella, as you continued your beautiful dancing career and eventually fabulous cheerleading, I know he couldn't wipe that smile off his face. Claire, I've heard no one was allowed to pull you along in your little red wagon at the beach but your grandfather. He certainly enjoyed leading the way to your venturing out into this world. He also loved your beautiful singing voice. Tom, you've inherited his good looks, and I hear from a very, very young age. And Sunday evenings were reserved for your weekly call from the time you got your first cell phone. Eleanor, Joe was so tickled by your pluck and dedication to everything you tried and worked on from school plays to flagpole, leading to your shared interest in football. And Steele, his youngest grandchild. Joe admired your great friendships with your buddies, your loyalty, your courtesy, and your charm. There is no doubt where all that came from. And finally, Joe's relationship with God was limitless. I attended many wonderful family gatherings of family and friends, and I can tell you, without exception, Joe and Mary Pat would disappear at precisely 4:45 to get to the Saturday evening 5 o'clock Mass. So in later years, I called Joel my godfather of soul. And one thing I know for sure is that his soul will shine on in all of our hearts forever. May Joe's memory be a blessing to us all.
Good afternoon. Maureen, when Mary Pat corrected you, in the middle of your remembrances. It reminded me that I had actually considered submitting my remarks to her in advance. But we're just going to muddle along. A long time ago, my father, the original Bill Henry, told me that there are two kinds of funerals that politicians go to. And looking out into this crowd, I need to stress that elected officials are not the only politicians. The first kind you go to because the person who has passed is a valued member of the community. They are loved and respected by their family and their neighbors. They will always be remembered for their achievements, and they will be sorely missed. The second kind you go to make sure they're dead. We're not going to name names. That would be inappropriate. But I think everybody here recognizes the fact that we're here for the first kind. Now, I know I'm supposed to be talking about Joe's legacy, but I really want to say that the older I've gotten, the more I've come to really admire Joe's everyday demeanor, his sense of calm and purpose, his unflappability. I told a coworker once that if you looked up quiet dignity in the dictionary, there'd be a picture of Joe smiling with a little mischievous twinkle in his eye, saying, "Oh no, please." And I can't pass up this opportunity to share that Joe Clarke was a hero to me, not just because when I was younger, my parents looked up to him and respected him, and not just because I was eventually old enough to understand and appreciate how rare it is to find a truly decent and good man. But mostly he was a hero to me because during a particularly impressionable period of my life, he stood out as not being even one little bit afraid of Mary Pat. That is not a bar many cross. I am told that I met Joe when I was too young to remember. My folks were still measuring my age in months when my father was the campaign manager for the Clarke Dalton ticket in 1970. It was a historic achievement. Never before had there been such a union. You had a white political club, New Democratic Club 2, working collaboratively and on an equal footing with a black political club, the East Side Democratic Organization. NDC and EDO made the national news, running an 18-member integrated slate and winning 15 of those races that year. Yeah, we can clap for that. Unfortunately for Joe, but possibly not so unfortunately for his family, Joe was not one of the winners. He lost by less than 300 votes to Jack Lapidus from the rival Mount Royal Club. Good, no hissing or booing. That's, you guys have grown, congratulations. And his own ticket mate, Bob Dalton. Ever the gentleman, which honestly, that should be his true epitaph, ever the gentleman. Even though he was encouraged to request a recount, considering how small the margin of difference was, he declined. He did not want to run the risk of succeeding, and in doing so, imperil Bob Dalton's own victory. And you see, one of the basic underlying reasons for the Clarke-Dalton ticket was to bring representative balance to a majority black district, one that had never had a black state senator. And Joe Clarke was the kind of man who would never let something as small as individual goals and personal ambition keep him from pursuing the greater good. And so Joe's real legacy is that Baltimore City will always be the richer for his efforts.
Mary Pat, how have I ever offended you? You sandwiched me in between Bill Henry and a bagpiper? Or Al Barry, was it you who did this to me? Oh, man. Well, thank you, friends. It's a terrible day. God be thanked. I'm remembering one night, maybe 20 years ago, when Joe Clarke had wangled me a chance to talk to people at the Hopkins Club. Joe was a poobah at the Hopkins Club. And if you're a poobah and you've got to introduce a speaker, you have to say something about it. What Joe said about me was, he's a Baltimore guy. Well, Father Frayne talked about how Joe had welcomed him to Baltimore from Philadelphia. Mary Pat, you can probably tell about how Joe welcomed you to Baltimore from Philadelphia. Well, I wasn't from Philadelphia, I was from Baltimore. In theory, nobody needed to welcome me to Baltimore. I was born and raised here. But when Joe Clarke introduced me to that audience, the only thing he said about me was, he's a Baltimore guy. I knew that I was one. I knew Joe well enough by that time to know that that was a high compliment, that was a deep compliment. And from that day on, I have felt like a Baltimore guy. Joe had the authority, the moral authority, to speak for the community and to welcome a human being to the community, to acknowledge that a human being was a part of the community, to make me, in my case, realize that I was a part of the community even though I'd been dumb enough to think that I was a part of it already before Joe pronounced me. Joe had that kind of authority. We've heard about how Joe maintained high standards for himself and how important it was for him to be himself, and each of us is an individual. We've heard about how Joe loved his family and how his family loved him. And each of us is a part of a family, and that's important. We've heard about how Joe was a child of God and a part of the blessing of the creation. That's pretty important. But Joe was a fellow who had the authority to say that somebody was or was not a Baltimore guy. And there is a fourth dimension to each of us. We're not just individuals. We're not just part of a family. We're not just children of God. We're part of a community. Joe was a part of this community, and better than just about anybody I know, he embodied the values in this community that made me proud when Joe Clarke said that I was a Baltimore